So let's look at a little bit more information about our polar covalent bonds. So in an earlier slide, I showed you this representation of the covalent bonding of water. So specifically, it's actually a polar covalent bond because the oxygen has a higher electronegativity than the hydrogen. And you can see that in this representation because the shared electrons within that polar covalent bond are actually closer to the oxygen than they are to the hydrogen. Again, we can represent it as this simplified representation with a line connecting the oxygen and hydrogen, indicating the polar covalent bond. So we have the shared electrons being more attracted to the oxygen than hydrogen within each of these polar covalent bonds. So in this representation where we show the oxygen is connected to hydrogen via the polar covalent bond, there's actually a way of designating which atom is more attracted to the electrons than the other. And that is using this symbol called delta negative, showing that oxygen is actually partially negative or partly negative due to the electrons being more attracted to it. And we can see that in this point here. So with the shared pair of negative electrons being more attracted to oxygen, this gives oxygen a partially negative charge. So it's just a way of showing that because the negative electrons spend more time around so it's just a way of showing that because of the proximity of the electrons to oxygen, we can designate that it has a partially negative charge. It's not a full negative charge like you would see on an ion, but it is a partial negative charge nonetheless. So the second piece is to show that the other atom involved in the polar covalent bond is actually partially positive. So because the hydrogen actually has the shared pair of electrons being less attracted to it, essentially the negative charge is drawn away from the hydrogen atoms. And we can show this by designating it as a partial positive. So wherever you see a representation where one atom is partially negative and one is partially positive, you know that the covalent bond connecting them has to be polar, because the basis of the partial negative and the partial positive is which atom is more attracted to those shared electrons. So we looked at an example on the previous slide where nitrogen was attached to 3 separate hydrogens. And in this case, nitrogen was the electronegative atom. So how could we use this representation of partially negative and partially positive to show the way the electrons are being shared unequally between the nitrogens and hydrogens in this case? Which of these atoms would get the partially negative symbol? Well, because the nitrogen is the more electronegative atom, the electrons will be more attracted to the nitrogen than they would be to these hydrogens within those covalent bonds. So we can designate that as being partially negative. So with the electrons being closer to the nitrogen, more attracted to it, that means they're further away from the hydrogen. And that means we can designate these as being partially positive. So we'll see a bit later in the course that components that are partially negative and partially positive actually have a way of attracting certain components that are required for a hydrogen bond. We'll learn about that a little bit later on. So an important point here that I've kind of drawn over is that partial charges are not true positive or negative charges. So they're not as strong as a full charge, full 1- charge or a full 1+ charge, but they are what we call partial charges. So now we've covered off on polar covalent bonding, let's look at non-polar covalent bonding. So remember, the non-polar is where we have equal electron sharing between the two atoms involved in the covalent bond. Again, we can represent the covalent bond just as a line between the two atoms involved, representing that 2 electron sharing relationship. So in this representation, we can see that the shared pairs of electrons are equally attracted to both the carbon and hydrogen atoms, and this comes back to the fact that they have similar electronegativities. They both belong to the low electronegativity group. So because both carbon and hydrogen belong to the low electronegativity group in this case. That means that the shared pairs of electrons are equally close to both the carbon and hydrogen atoms. So there's not going to be any partial negatives or partial positives because both get essentially half of the negative charge from the shared electrons. So there's no need to draw the partial positives or the partial negatives. So this is a good way to tell the difference between a polar covalent compound and a non-polar covalent compound. A polar covalent compound will have these partial negatives and partial positives if they've been drawn in, whereas the non-polar covalent compound that contains non-polar covalent bonds will never have the partial positives and the partial negatives drawn in, because to get those you need unequal electron sharing. And in the non-polar covalent bonds we have equal electron sharing. Therefore, the distribution of charge between the two atoms involved in the covalent bond is the same. Keep in mind though that we won't always have these partial charges drawn in on these covalent compounds that contain the polar covalent bonds, but if they are there, it gives you a hint towards whether they are polar or whether they are non-polar. So we know that the basis of the covalent bond is the fact that two nonmetal atoms are sharing their unpaired valence electrons with each other to form covalent bonds. And this allows covalent compounds to form. And the basis of this is for the atoms involved in forming these compounds to try and become stable. So by pairing their unpaired electrons, they can have 8 electrons in their outer valence shell and satisfy the octet rule to become stable. So based on what type of atom we have, that's going to dictate how many unpaired valence electrons the atom has, and therefore how many covalent bonds it needs to form to become stable and fill that valence electron shell. Because remember, the number of unpaired valence electrons is equal to the number of covalent bonds it needs to form to get those 8 electrons. So depending on which atom it is, it might be possible for it to form single, double, or triple covalent bonds. So for example, we can have a single covalent bond formed between chlorine and fluorine because they each have one valence electron that is unpaired that needs to be paired for them to become stable. So the ClF, as we see here, forms the compound ClF. So quite often you'll see compounds drawn without showing the covalent bonds between them, and that's the representation here that I've put the box around. So an example of a double covalent bond is where we have 2 electron shared pairs between a carbon and oxygen. So there's a double covalent bond between this carbon and this oxygen, as shown by the 2 lines here. So we've actually got another double bond on this side as well. So this allows us to form the covalent compound CO2. Another option for some atoms that need to form 3 covalent bonds is to form a triple covalent bond, where there's actually 3 shared pairs of electrons. So remember, each line here represents 2 electrons being shared between the 2 atoms involved. So nitrogen has 3 unpaired valence electrons, so it can actually become stable by forming 3 of these covalent bonds, a triple covalent bond with another nitrogen atom, to form the N2 molecule. So we're going to have a look at the different ways that some of these common atoms that we'll see in this course form their covalent bonds to become stable. And this is the form they're in when they're part of a compound. So remember, we can work out the number of valence electrons that an atom has by looking at the periodic table, working out which group it's in, because the group number corresponds to the number of unpaired valence electrons. So for carbon that's in group 4, it has 4 valence electrons, and because each of the orbitals will have 1 valence electron, that means that they're all unpaired. Nitrogen belongs to group 5, and therefore there's going to be 1 pair and 3 unpaired valence electrons. So you can see that the number of valence electrons for carbon and nitrogen equals the number of covalent bonds that it can form. So because carbon contains 4 unpaired valence electrons, each of those valence electrons can participate in 1 covalent bond for a total of 4 covalent bonds for carbon to get its 8 valence electrons. Whereas for nitrogen, it needs to form 3 covalent bonds to satisfy the need to get 8 electrons, pairing all those 3 unpaired electrons. So we can see the Lewis dot symbols for both carbon and nitrogen in this case. So I showed you on an earlier slide that the atoms can form either single, double, or triple covalent bonds to satisfy their bonding arrangements. Keep in mind though that the atoms that are bonding to, for example, a carbon or nitrogen, also have to have their bonding arrangements satisfied as well. So you can only have, for example, a double bond formed to something that needs 2 covalent bonds. So something like an oxygen that needs 2 covalent bonds would be able to form a double bond to a carbon, but a hydrogen wouldn't, because it only needs to form 1 covalent bond. So let's go through and look at some of the different combinations for the carbon and nitrogen atoms and the way they would form this. So you can see each pink line here represents a possible covalent bonding arrangement. So remember that carbon has 4 unpaired valence electrons, and that means it can form these 4 covalent bonds. So it could be 4 singles, 2 singles and a double, 2 doubles, a triple, or a single. You can't have a quadruple covalent bond because of the way that the orbitals are arranged. They can't all be on one side of the atom to form an attachment in that way. So for example, if we were going to have 4 single attachments, we could have 4 attachments to 4 different hydrogen atoms. And that would allow carbon's need for 4 covalent bonds to be satisfied, and also the need of hydrogen, which needs 1. What about if we have a double bond here? Then we can use something like an oxygen that needs 2 covalent bonds, and the singles can be filled with hydrogens. Keep in mind that there's lots more combinations than what I'm drawing. It's just an example. We saw earlier that we could have carbon with 2 double bonds to 2 different oxygens. This will satisfy carbon's need for 4 bonds and each oxygen's need for 2, which is the covalent compound carbon dioxide. Carbon could form a triple bond to another carbon atom or a nitrogen. So let's put a nitrogen in there. That'll satisfy nitrogen's bonding arrangements, and a hydrogen here as well. What about for the nitrogen atom? So here it's got 1 pair in its valence shell, so that doesn't contribute to bonding, but the 3 unpaired valence electrons contribute to bonding, so we can have 3 attachments to different atoms. For example, 3 hydrogens here. Double bond, what might we be able to double bond to? Let's put an oxygen in there because it only needs 2 bonds. Another hydrogen to fill the single. And what do you think the nitrogen might be able to triple bond to? We could put a carbon in there, but then the carbon would need 1 extra bond. So let's put a nitrogen in there instead. Now both atoms are satisfied. So you can see in all these arrangements that I've drawn here, each atom has the right number of bonds. So all of the nitrogen atoms have 3 bonds, all the oxygens have 2, and all the carbons have 4, and all the hydrogens have 1. This is what they need to satisfy their bonding arrangements to be stable and get that full valence electron shell. So whenever we're drawing these types of structures, we need to make sure that all of the atoms involved have the right number of electrons. So continuing on from what we were looking at with carbon and nitrogen, we've got a few of the other common atoms that we'll see and the way that they can form their bonds. So because oxygen belongs to group 6, that means it's got 6 valence electrons in its outer shell that we can see here. 2 will be paired and not contribute to bonding, but we've got 2 unpaired electrons, which allows it to form 2 covalent bonds. And once it forms these bonds, it will then be stable and have 8 electrons. So if we put 2 hydrogens attached to these 2 covalent bonds from the oxygen atom, we've then formed water. And we've also satisfied the bonding arrangements for the oxygen and the 2 hydrogens. What could oxygen possibly form a double bond with? Well, it's possible for oxygen to double bond with another oxygen to form the O2 molecule. So this is the common form of oxygen we see, and the gaseous oxygen is in this O2 form. So the last one I want you to be aware of is hydrogen and also the halogen atoms. So the halogen atoms are in group 7, hydrogen is in group 1. They both need one extra valence electron, so they're going to get up to 8 for the halogen atoms, and for hydrogen to get 2 valence electrons, it needs to pair its 1 valence electron. So you can see that in these representations down here. Hydrogen needs to get 1 more electron because it's got 1 unpaired, and fluorine needs to get 1 more also because it's got 1 unpaired. So to get a full valence shell, essentially the hydrogen and the fluorine just form one covalent bond to something else. So for example, hydrogen could form a covalent bond to another hydrogen, fluorine could form it to another fluorine, or you could mix it up a bit with the hydrogen bonding to fluorine. So in theory, the hydrogen and the fluorine can hydrogen bond to any other atom that needs one covalent bond. It would also be possible, for example, for the hydrogen to form a bond to something like an oxygen to satisfy hydrogen's need for one covalent bond, but now oxygen needs 1 more, so you would need to have that oxygen bonding to something else. So remember, every atom in your compound or group of atoms needs to have the right number of covalent bonds to ensure that it has full valence electron shells for each atom involved. Alright, so now we've reached a participation plus question. So this is a really good way of checking that you've understood what we've been through in this section. This is quite a tricky question, talking about the way that the bonding occurs within a water molecule and what this means in terms of the type of bonding, the distribution of electrons, etc. So I really do encourage you to have a go at this question before moving on, and also to share your answers with your peers in your online cohort. We've also now covered the content for questions 5 and 6, so please log on to the LMS and go into the revision quiz and have a go at these 2 questions now as well. So to summarize the second part of this session, we saw that the electronegativity was an atom's capacity to attract a shared pair of electrons to itself, so those are the electrons within the covalent bond. We also saw that some of the atoms could be considered high electronegativity atoms, so they were good at attracting electron pairs, things like oxygen, nitrogen, chlorine, and fluorine, whereas others belong to a low electronegativity group, things like hydrogen and carbon. We saw nonpolar covalent bonding arrangements in compounds where the atoms involved had similar electronegativities, which meant that the electrons were equally attracted to both atoms involved. So this could be 2 low electronegativity atoms like carbon and hydrogen, or it could be 2 high electronegativity atoms connecting like oxygen and nitrogen, for example. The other type of covalent bonding, however, is polar covalent bonding, and the hallmark of a polar covalent bond is where the atoms involved in the bond actually have different electronegativities, meaning that the electrons are actually more attracted to one atom than the other, specifically the one with the high electronegativity. So if we take the example of H2O, where the oxygen has a higher electronegativity than the hydrogen, the shared electrons within that covalent bond are more attracted to the oxygen than they are to the hydrogen atom. And we can designate that as showing that the oxygen will be partially negative and the hydrogens being partially positive due to the negative electrons being closer to the oxygen than they are to the hydrogen. I also showed you that different atoms can form different numbers of covalent bonds depending on how many covalent bonds they need to form to actually be stable and have a full valence shell of electrons. So for example, something like hydrogen needs to form 1 bond to achieve its full shell, whereas something like oxygen needs 2, nitrogen 3, and carbon 4.